where we put this issue. So, in teaching and learning, we have been able to look at a number of things. And as we continue, I want to be able to just take our attention to a particular focus. And we have history of teaching in Kenya, and education is as old as mankind, and therefore learning also takes place in various ways. And education has developed steadily also since independence, since the introduction of 844, and now we have got the CBC plus different system. 844 was introduced in 1985, but then before then, there's also uh, even before the Europeans came for the colonization, we also had the oral narration of events that were passed down from one generation to another generation. And after independence, KANU had got a manifesto that declared that. Its intention to be able to fight and see that we have three great enemies that were enemies of development that needed to be dealt with. And this includes poverty, illiteracy, and disease. And we talk about illiteracy, you're basically talking about learning and education or something of that sort. So there are generally currently more boys than girls basically accessing education in Kenya, but I'm happy that when you look at the academy statistics, we actually have more ladies than gentlemen in terms of the education program that we have. So, in terms of history, nutrition course was actually first introduced in 1966 in Karen College of Nutrition. That commenced the training of nutrition field workers and nutrition assistants who were formerly basically enrolled nurses. That's how they used to call themselves. So nutrition services at KNH, in fact, that is one of the first initial services that were being introduced in our clinical setup, was instituted in nearly the 1970s by qualified dietitians that came from overseas. And then from there, we had in 1982 the formation of the Nutrition Association of Kenya, where we now had some engagement of some of the local nutritionists also coming on board. If you look at your notes on ethics and professionalism unit, you basically also see something about when the Kenya Nutrition and Dietetics Institute was established by Act of Parliament number 18 of Cap 2000 and of 2007 Cap 253B. You'll be able to see the role of Kenya Nutrition and Dietetics Institute in terms of regulating professionals. In the previous discussions that we've had, we've been able to define certain terms. We've been able to discuss what is learning, and we've been able to say, according to Cox and Ewan, 1998, these two defines learning as a process of acquiring new habits, knowledge, skills, which enables students to do something that they could not do before. And therefore, we can also say and comfortably define learning as a process resulting in some modification of behavior, way of thinking, and also feeling or doing by the learner. And then we have also looked at a number of principles, and these principles are basically laws or rules, truth or facts about something. And that is the definition of principles. So, in looking at the principles that support issues of teaching and learning, we have been able to look at one. Yesterday, we looked at motivation in depth. Two, we also have got the element of information, what information is, data forming information. So, you must also remember that. Then, we also have practice, that this is something that you do continuously, and that we've been able to say, and that is how you make sure that there's some retention, that we have then feedback. We also looked at that, and we also learned that when you're talking about motivation, there is a curve and there are those steps, and those steps also culminate in feedback. So that is very important. We've also been able to point out that students learn using the principles that we have been able to identify. So, the students learn what is relevant and useful, and that's why we discussed the concept yesterday of forgetting, and memory, because they're basically selective in looking at what is useful and relevant to them. The students also learn when the material that is presented to them is in a logical and sequential order. And that one we also looked at yesterday when we were looking at how this can be able to done. We also looked at students being able to learn when they are actively involved, and we looked at the role of the teacher or the instructor in basically providing content. So we want to see how this variation of teaching methods are done to be able to make sure that the learner is more involved in terms of the learning process. Students also learn when they receive feedback on their performance, and students still ask, they find basically go to ask, how did I perform in this exam? How did I answer that question? So feedback is also very important because it also shows that learning has taken place. So the ingredients of learning as a process, and it's important that we look at the characteristics of learning. And kindly mute. Timna mute. Patel, mute everybody. Patel, you need to mute everybody.
But then he's unmuting it on his end.
Okay. So as I was talking about these ingredients of learning, I was able to also look at the characteristics of learning. So the first one is that learning produces a behavior change in the learner, and that one we were able to identify this right from the beginning. We also said that one another characteristics of learning is basically that learning leads to change that is gradual, adaptable, and selective. Learning also results from repetitive practice and experience. And we also say that in learning uh, is also not directly observable. It is basically abstract. So you can't be able to look at somebody's head and says that I can see that you have learnt a lot. So basically it has to be manifested by change of behavior, adaptation, and basically also outputting certain experiences that can be able to be commensurate to what is perceived to be learning. So this is something that is very important. I want to be able just to be able to pick up on something. We say that it results from repetitive practice and experience. And I told you that one of the biggest enemy to this learning process is basically age. And when you age and you're not practicing and you're not doing the practice that you've been also been practicing, and it is not continuous, then you end up basically forgetting as a point, and also basically unlearning what you have basically learned. Teaching. Teaching, in summary, basically teaching, we said, is transferring or conveying knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Usually refers to instructions provided through classroom activities. So when you say somebody is teaching, we sometimes basically look at the classroom setup in most cases. But it is basically conveying knowledge, skills, and attitudes to the learner. So it is an interaction between the teacher or the instructor and the learners under the teacher's supervision in order to bring out expected changes in the learner's behavior. We have this person that we call a teacher. A teacher is a person who has knowledge, skills in a specified subject area, and the ability and has the ability and training to transfer them to others. So you have the ability and training. So qualification, ability, skills to be able to pass the knowledge and skills to others. The others here refers to the learners. So somebody who passes information to students at some time facilitates learning. So this is something that you need to be able to look at. So the principles of learning, The first one, allow me to be able to just look at them. We have dealt with the concepts. Now, just want us to be able to look at principles. So, the first principle of learning is basically individualization. So, basically, learning is unique, and individual people learn on their own. So, basically, you find that people being able to learn on their own, and they get to um, narrow down to the individual, because all of you cannot say, despite the fact that skills are passed to all of you, by the end of the day, uniquely, people will be able to learn. The retention, the change of behavior, the change of attitude happens at individual level. Then we also have motivation, that will force that we talked about, that pushes you to want to learn. um, and basically also looking at, people will not learn unless they want to. If people don't want to learn, they will not learn, and there's nothing you can do about it. They can fail to wake up to read their notes, they can fail to be able to have discussions with peers, they can fail to be able to listen to what we are saying. For example, like right now we are teaching, they can fail to be able to basically comprehend what you're talking about. So that is something that we have also said, that motivation is the second principle. The third one is relevance. So relevance, we've basically find that students will learn more rapidly when they realize the relevance of their future life. So you need to tell um, people things that make sense to them, for them to be able to know that what you're basically discussing with them has got a particular bearing and relevance in terms of their future. The fourth principle is basically feedback and evaluation, which needs to be immediate, and therefore we need to be able to prevent learners from learning wrong things by basically providing those feedbacks and evaluation, and people need to check what they are basically learning. So, number five, in terms of the principles, you're also looking at the practice and repetition. So, learning evolves from um, incompetent to competent through repetition practice that makes perfect and always helps in the mastery. So basically, you realize that if you read one time of these particular notes, they may not make sense to you until basically you basically read them over and over to be able to retain something. Practice what you have learned for learning to be able to say that has taken place, and you developing what is called mastery of subject or concept. Number six, a systemic approach. Basically, learning relates to new information with what the learner already knows, and therefore you realize that learning happens from known to unknown, and learning is easier when the content is organized in that particular manner. So the seventh item is basically active involvement and participation of the learners. So, learning takes place quicker when students actively process the information, solve problems, or practice skills, which is basically the practical element of learning. So, learning occurs more if the learner are involved in the process. And that is why, for example, for us in this particular academy, you realize that the mode of examination for this particular unit is through a project, to be able to see if the learner was able to learn what we were able to discuss with them in class. So we also have the eighth item, which is basically clarity of objectives. So statements describing what the students should be able to learn by the end of the session is very important as one of the principle, and therefore what they need to learn in terms of objectives need to be smart. And then we have the ninth one, which is basically the social relationships. So in the social relationships, we are looking at learning is affected by the social relationship between the people involved. So here we have teacher learner relationship, we also have learner learner relationship, and we say that teacher learner relationship only amounts to a very little percentage of the learning process. But the learner learner, which is peer education, when you're learning from your peer to be able to find out what they were able to grasp in class, you basically learn a huge percentage, approximated at 70, could be plus or minus. So this is very important for you to be able to understand this. So basically, the other thing is basically the 10th principle, which is basically enjoyment. So basically making things exciting, and therefore learning takes more effect. And basically learning takes place more better when the environment is exciting and the whatever discussion is basically exciting, and therefore you find that boring and unpleasant discussions or environment would not be able to support learning. 11, we basically have conducive physical environment. I've been able to allude to that. So quiet environment, spacious classrooms, no distractions would be able to improve in terms of the principles that we've been able to discuss. Then we also have clarity and speed of presenting information. The speed of presenting must match the understanding that people have. That if you don't understand stuff, then you can basically ask that the staff or presentation can be able to go slower so that you can be able to better understand. So the information that is communicated must be clear. Use of appropriate teaching aid to be able to better understand what is being able to be discussed. There's something that I want you to be able to also understand. We have conditions for adult learning or the principles for adult learning. The adult learner is a special person, he's different from the child, and therefore, the art of helping adults to learn is called andragogy. So, basically, it's an art that helps you to be able to um, learn things better. But for the children, for you, the art of helping the children to learn is called pedagogy. So this is something that you'll be able to see the difference. Andragogy, and then we also have pedagogy for the children. So adults learn faster and better in the following instances: when it is their own decision to learn, and we discussed that. They make their own decisions to learn. The interest has to come from them. The other thing is that when information or skills acquired are of use to them, relevance, we talked about it. They also learn better when learning takes place in an atmosphere of trust, acceptance, encouragement, basically discussing conducive environment. The adult learners also learn better when they are involved in what is being taught and are actively involved in the learning activities. So basically, looking at perception, they also learn better when there are no distractions during the classroom sessions. Concentration. They also learn better when they know what to expect and what is expected of them. This is very important for you to be able to understand how the adult learner works. So, adults have many previous experiences that are pertinent in any educational activities. Ignoring them causes resistance to learning. So, you must be able to appreciate that they also know something and build from what is known to what is unknown, and then you have a good discussion that can be able to uh, continue. So we need to also look at factors that can inhibit learning. So the first one is basically lack of self-belief. For example, if you don't believe that you can make it, I have received some requests that people tell me that they find this course to be uh, a bit involving. They didn't know that it would be this involving, but you must believe in yourself that you don't get um, good results, self satisfaction, if there are no barriers and hindrances and challenges. But you must be able to believe in your inability to be able to learn something, be it maths, algebra, or concepts that are difficult, and theories to be able to understand concepts better. Something else is basically the social factors and commitments that come with an adult. An adult is a busy person. They have responsibility to take care of. They have also the challenges of life to be able to address. And these ones are things that you must take into consideration when you're also doing your lesson plan, and also trying to be able to reach out and teach something. And achievements in school is also something that sometimes they are concerned about. Exam anxiety is also something that some people are concerned about, and also looking at uh, the environment of learning are things that you should be able to also look at, and so on and so forth. and so on and so forth. There are so many that you'll be able to look at as we go on. I want to be able to quickly run through the theories of learning. So there are major learning theories, and these major learning theories are grouped into three. We have got behaviorist theories, we have um, cognitive theories, and we also have humanistic or the social psychologist theories. So I can go through them in several ways, and basically, when we start with the behaviorist theory, it was done by somebody called John B. Watson, and however, this work was made better by Ivan Palvon. So basically, also looking at a number of things. So he identifies two forms of learning. He identified uh, classical conditioning and operant conditioning or instrumental conditioning, or basically looking at conditioning as a form of learning. So conditioning is equal to learning. So this two discusses a number of issues, but I want to be able to take this in a small way so that I can be able to quickly show you something. um, I want to show you something, just allow me. Okay, can you see my screen?
Good grammar and spelling are important. But if you want to write essays that
Can you see my screen?
inspire,
Yes.
Okay, so listen in.
Video on learning theories. We're going to be talking about some of the major learning theories in this video, and there are many different versions of them, and there are a lot of specific ones. So we're just going to kind of lump them together into three categories and get an overview. So if you're interested in writing about this or learning more, you definitely need to do more research, but I hope that this will serve as a nice introduction for you. All right, so first off, there are a lot of theories about learning and how learning takes place. So when a child learns something new from their parents, or when a child goes to school and they learn something in class from a lesson, how does that actually happen? What are the conditions needed? What
Is
kind of
it just
behaviors are needed
or
from the person
everyone can
facilitating
hear?
that learning, the leader, the teacher, the parent, and what kinds of
There's
role
no
does
sound.
the child themselves play in that process? Each theory has their own view on all these different aspects of learning. So we're going to talk about three today. The main ones that we're going to cover are behaviorism, cognitivism, and constructivism. And some of these have a range of different names, so we've kind of lumped them all together, and you'll see that. So here are some visuals that you can go back and review to look at that I found online that just have some basic traits of each theory that you can kind of review to see what the differences between behaviorism, cognitivism, and social theory or constructivism. There's a range of different names, and so I'm trying to combine them so you'll see that, and I hope that that helps. Okay, the first one we're going to talk about is behaviorism. Some of the major theorists are Watson, Pavlov, Skinner, and Cantor. And these folks, many of them are those who focus on psychology or child development, although Cantor is very much focused on classroom behaviors and discipline. So the learning theory suggests that learning happens through repetition and positive reinforcement, also known as operant conditioning. And so for these folks, they believe that learning happens based on a stimulus. When someone experiences some kind of stimulus from their surroundings or another person, and then they react to it, that's conditioning. Then we have operant conditioning occurs when we are trying to facilitate that process to create new memories and behaviors. And so that behavior change is what they believe is actual learning. So for behaviorists, the learning didn't take place if the behaviors don't change. That means they didn't really get it. And so the implications for teaching means then that the teacher's job is to model the correct behaviors and provide extrinsic motivation for engagement. Meaning that as I am teaching, I'm modeling the way I want you to behave, the way I want you to learn something, the way I want you to complete a task, and then I'm going to show you how to do it. And as you do it and you try it out, I'm going to reinforce the right behaviors and the right tasks and the right activities that I want to see for learning. And I'm going to provide consequences when I see infractions on that. Doesn't necessarily need to be extreme, but if I see something negative taking place or you're doing it wrong, I'm going to correct you, right? So that's the whole point of behaviorism. It is very much focused on the outcomes of how students behave based off of their learning situation. Implications for management means that I'm going to, in this model, set up clear boundaries, offer incentives, and often that means token economies. You'll see a lot of
Am I the
schools
only one
still
not
function in
hearing
a
anything?
behaviorist
There's
model,
no sound.
even though it seems that many
There's no
theorists and
volume, there's no
researchers
sound. I can't
nowadays
just say
view
anything.
behavior.
Um. Okay. Nobody was hearing anything.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, I can share the link. You basically look at it at your own free time. So we were looking at a number of the theories that come. We have been able to look at mention something about the behaviorist theory. We've been able to say how they came about. We have been able to also uh, identify the forms in terms of classical and operant conditioning, and we've been able to discuss how these have happened. So I want to discuss two of these people who founded this. We've said that this was first done by John Watson, but improved or made better by Ivan Pavlov. And basically, Ivan did this between 1849 to 1936. He's a Russian biologist who investigated uh, salivation in dogs. So he observed that after a bell rang, the dog was offered food. Even without the food, the dog continued to salivate um, when the bell rang. So basically, he conditioned the dog to salivate so that it becomes a reflex action. So when conditioning to certain stimuli, people automatically respond whether rewarded or not, because you have been able to condition that environment of doing things. A good example, you can basically condition the class to be able to accept to go past, say, 5 p.m. They started in the morning, maybe in a conference or seminar. Sometimes you see right from day one, they are conditioned to know that learning can take place past these adult hours, and they are flexible to be able to adapt to that particular environment. So this is called classical conditioning. Something else could be that you can basically train a dog using some stimuli, then at some point you remove the stimuli, then they remain having learnt how to do that thing the same way, in that manner. So this is something that you can basically see how it goes. Another good example sometimes that I can be able to give is that sometimes um, in our setup, sometimes we improvise certain formulas because there was no resources and money to procure what we could have naturally used. But in our conditioning, we get so used to the improvisation that even when the alternative is present, we are still conditioned to be able to do what we have been doing because we learned through conditioning. So to summarize this, is that in the classical example, conditioning is equal to learning. So that is something that you needed to be able to just summarize that way. So thanks to classical conditioning, you might have developed the habit of heading to the kitchen for a snack every time a commercial break comes. So, for example, you're watching your favorite program, and when they go for a break, you end up going to the fridge to pick a Coke or something. Then it becomes part of you to be able to go for a drink or crave for it, or to be able to just find a way of quenching your thirst, or watching a movie while eating your popcorns or crisps or something of that sort. So while those commercial breaks come in a repetitive manner, you end up conditioning yourself to be able to have your delicious snacks, and therefore it also forms part and parcel of conditioning that you'll be able to have for that particular uh, activity. So that is something that you learned through your conditioning, repetitive action, and therefore it also forms part of your learning. The second person is somebody called Skinner. He came up with operant conditioning, and his research was on the behavior of rats and pigeons. So, operant conditioning, Skinner basically identified three types of responses and or operant that can follow a certain behavior. So, the first operant or the first response is what is called the neutral operants. So, responses from the environment that neither increase nor decrease the probability of behavior being repeated. So, that is a neutral operant. Then you also have reinforcers. So, responses from the environment that increase the probability of a behavior being repeated. So, reinforcers can be either positive or negative. Then we have punishers. So, responses from the environment that decreases the likelihood of a behavior being repeated. So, punishment weakens behavior. So, for example, if you have been doing certain wrong things, even at workplace, then your boss prescribes certain punishment, says denies you certain offs because you were used to doing things or coming late or something, then that form of punishment of denying you your offs and leave days would be able to prevent you from behaving in the way that is not prescribed. For example, if when you were young, you tried possibly maybe smoking, and the chief consequences that possibly you got was a beating from your parents, and therefore that particular learning was unlearned, for example. But if you are left to continue learning how to smoke or not being punished, for example, you get to repeat that behavior, and therefore that behavior is reinforced. So basically, a chief consequence of what you got uh, in with the crowd that you always wanted to hang out with, uh, they basically reinforced certain behavior that you ended up repeating that particular behavior. So, also, the environment that we are in sometimes also reinforces or punishes or introduces new responses that we basically have. So, uh, if, for example, the main consequence that was there was that you were caned and suspended from school, or your parent became involved and certainly punishment was involved, you will not want to see even a finger of a cigarette. So, this is something that you'll be able to understand. Something else that we also have is positive reinforcement that was discussed by Skinner. So Skinner showed how positive reinforcement worked by placing a hungry rat in a Skinner box. So basically, um, the box contained a level, a lever on one side, and as the rat moved about the box, it would accidentally knock the lever. Immediately, it did so. A food pellet would drop into the container next to that particular lever. So the rats quickly learned to go straight to the lever. After few times of being about in the box, the consequences of receiving food if they pressed the lever ensured that they would repeat the action again and again. Um, Positive reinforcement strengthens a behavior by providing a consequence an individual finds rewarding. A good example, if a teacher gives you 50 shillings each time you complete your homework, you will do more likely to, you will be uh, considered more likely to repeat this behavior in future, and therefore strengthening the behavior of completing your homework, for example. So this is something that you'll be able to see as we go on. Then we also have negative reinforcement. The removal of an unpleasant reinforcer can be also strengthen behavior. Also can also strengthen behavior. So when we remove this unpleasant reinforcer that reinforces certain behaviors, we can be able to strengthen certain behaviors. This is known as negative reinforcement. So, because it is the removal of an adverse stimulus which is rewarding to the animal or to the person. So negative reinforcement strengthens behavior because it stops or removes an unpleasant experience from this particular uh, animal or from this particular person. A good example: if you do not complete your homework, you give your teacher 50 shillings. You will complete your homework to avoid giving your teacher 50 shillings, thus strengthening the behavior of completing your homework. So, be it negative enforcement or negative enforcement, either of the two can also be able to strengthen a certain behavior, and in this case, completing of the homework. The other one, the teacher gives the student money, positive reinforcement. The teacher gives the student money to complete homework. Still, they complete homework because they are motivated to do so. The reverse is true. You expect 5 shillings to be able to be given if the student does not complete homework. Because they don't want to give the teacher money, they will be able to strengthen their behavior of completing their homework. So this is something that Skinner showed, that how negative reinforcement worked by placing a rat in this particular box, then subjecting it to an unpleasant electrical current which caused it some discomfort. As the rat moved around the box, it would accidentally knock the lever. Immediately it did so, the electric current would be switched off. The rat quickly learned to go straight to the lever. After a few times of being in the box, the consequence of escaping the electric current ensured that they would repeat the action and again. So the negative enforcement here is the electric current, but they realize that the lever switches off the electric current, and therefore they basically do the same to knock the lever to be able to switch off the electric current. In fact, Skinner even taught the rat to avoid the electric current by turning on a light just before the electric current came on, among other things. So this is a good example that you can basically look at and basically read more about it. If you can be able to read more about it and basically get better the concept, and basically something that was learned in the two responses are known as escape learning and avoidance learning. So those are things that you can be able to look at into greater detail. So we want to look at something called punishment into some small uh, depth now. So punishment is defined as the opposite of reinforcement, since it is designed to weaken or eliminate a response rather than increase it. It is an adverse event that decreases the behavior that it follows. So basically, if you have got this particular behavior that you want to be able to weaken or decrease or eliminate, then you introduce this opposite of reinforcement, which is punishment. So like reinforcement, punishment can work either by directly applying an unpleasant stimulus like a shock after a response, or by removing a potentially rewarding stimulus. For instance, deducting someone's salary to punish undesirable behavior. Yeah. So that's something that you can be able to say is a punishment. So note, it is not always easy to distinguish between punishment and negative reinforcement. So they're also very closely related, but you must also get time to be able to read more about the two concepts. So the disadvantages of punishment: there are many problems with using uh, punishment, such as punishment basically helps us to be able to unlearn certain ways of doing things. So there are many problems with using punishment, such as punished behavior is not forgotten, it is suppressed. Behavior returns when punishment is no longer present. For example, if you told people that you no longer deduct their salaries if they come late, so they basically just get back to come late. But you see, there's something that you see through negative learning or negative reinforcement, which could be different. Punishment would be that you deduct their salaries to punish them, so it suppresses that particular behavior. But negative reinforcement, a good example of negative reinforcement would be, for example, that employees would realize that each time that they they basically have got and them coming late, for example, if that was their behavior, and you want to introduce a negative reinforcement, they'll basically realize that they would have to basically follow a longer route, and therefore they realize that in them saving time, they'll basically find a way of working in the reverse. Let me just modify that example a bit. So, if, for example, each time they came late, you ask them to be able to uh, contribute to the employee kitty or contribute to the needy patients fund. So that's a negative reinforcement. So if they come early, you give them a bonus. If they come late, you basically ask them to contribute to the patient needy patients fund or help pay fees for a needy patient that cannot be able to pay their fees. They'll definitely come early to avoid a scenario where they have to pay the needy patients fund. So that is something that you basically look at. That, for example, if they come early, you basically give them lighter duties. When they come late, you give them heavy duties. So as such, they basically learn that this is something that they can be able to routinely condition themselves to be able to work better. So the disadvantages, like we have been able to say, of punishment. So the first one is that uh, there are many problems with using this, and I've said that it just suppresses but does not eliminate. The second one, it causes increased aggression, shows that aggression is a way of coping with problems in a particular way, and creates fear that can generalize, can be generally be understood uh, to be very undesirable. So basically, the fear of coming to work, or the fear of going to school, or the fear of learning, or the fear of participating, among other things. So this is something that you must be able to know, that while you would want to punish, you'll find it very difficult for them to be able to even continue participating or being engaged in learning. So the other thing is, for example, uh, uh, punishment does not necessarily guide towards desired behavior. Reinforcement tells you what to do. Punishment only tells you what was not done. So this is something that you must be able to see the distinction between the two. So we have difference between classical and operant, and I've been able to tell you a number of things about the two. And you'll basically see, for example, classical conditioning was first described by Ivan, like I mentioned, and I've also been able to tell you that it involves placing of natural signals before a reflex. And I've also been able to tell you that it focuses on involuntary automatic behaviors, whereas in operant conditioning was first described by B.F. Skinner, an American psychologist. It involves applying reinforcement or punishment after behavior, focuses on strengthening or weakening voluntary behaviors. He concluded that learning will occur and behavior will be shaped in the direction the teacher wants if the behavior is rewarded. So, reinforcement is the process by which a stimulus increases the probability that the preceding behavior will be repeated. And that's what we call reinforcement. So, you can basically refer to the Skinner box and basically looks at that experiment and learn more about it, and think about several examples that can come with it. The second theory is the cognitive theory. So, the theory originated from a group of scholars who studied the ways in which knowledge is acquired, stored, correlated, retrieved. So, the cognitive theory deals with how we learn factual information, concepts, and principles. So um, there are several under cognitive theory. We have um, the Bloom's taxonomy, um, brought up by B.S. Bloom. So he proposes three domains or categories of learning. So the domains are organized in the most simple to high complex ways. So here we have got the cognitive domain that is concerned with uh, knowledge. Then we have the affective domain that is concerned with attitudes. Then we also have the psychomotor domain that is concerned with muscular, mental activities, skills, and also looks at levels of learning occurring from basic existing knowledge to highest level simple to complex. So learning objectives should therefore be set in accordance to levels of the students, basic to tertiary, among other things. So that is what he's able to tell us. So he developed the classification or taxonomy of objectives, as we have been able to see there in our brief introduction. The second one that was there was by assimilation theory of learning by Asubel. So DP Asubel. So focuses on presentational teaching and acquisition of subject matter that involves the root and discovery of learning. This scholar emphasized that learning should start from um, known to unknown, from simple to complex. So this information should fit into existing knowledge like a key fitting into a lock. So basically, starting from what you know to what you don't know. So this is something that we'll be able to see in terms of what Asubel was able to across. So according to Asubel, the main variables affecting learning include: one, we have the cognitive variables. So here we are looking at the student's previous knowledge, intellectual ability of the student, the practice, arrangement of instructional material, developmental readiness, cognitive development of the student. So that is one. And this is basically the cognitive variable. The other thing that we need to look at is basically the affective or social variables. So here, Asbel is basically looking at the motivation and attitudes. He's also looking at the personality. He's looking at the teacher characteristics. He's also looking at the group and social factors. Number three, we also have somebody called Brunner in 1960. He's also looking at discovery learning. So basically, he's looking at learning involving three processes. So in the learning involving three processes, he's basically looking at acquisition of new information, build from what is known. He's also looking at transformation of information, analysis, and processed information, among other things, and its application. He also looks at evaluation as an important part of discovery of learning. He recommended discovery learning so that it can be useful to us in the future. He takes the learner as the focus and as an active participant in learning. If the learner understands the structure, they should be able to work for themselves. You discover for yourself for finer details. The teacher provides resources and problems to the learner to work out answers on their own effort. The student should be encouraged to work out things for themselves, discover. And that's why we say there's a discovery approach, research, for example, among other things. The third theory is the humanistic and social psychologist theory. So this is basically brought up by Carl Rogers. He provided a learner-centered view of learning. He had the following beliefs and assumption about humans. Number one, all humans have a natural potential and desire to learn. Two, learning occurs when the student perceives relevance related to his or her own purposes. Number three, learning is more effective when external threats are eliminated. Number four, significant learning is acquired through doing, action, doing it. Learning is more effective when the learner is responsible for choosing his or her direction, discovering resources, formulating problems. Most learning is self initiated and involves the whole person, including feelings as well as the intellect of that particular learner are applied. Self-evaluation is a basic skill necessary for effective, mature learning. Take your time to be able to look at some of the MCQs that could be able to help you to be able to better grasp the concept. This approach of Rogers has contributed immensely in adult learning, and in our case, in your case, we have put up this system in such a way that as we also have enforcement in terms of these live discussions, we also have got the portal which is the main domain of learning, not this one. What is important is what is on the website, because we are enforcing self learning, and this self learning is what we've said is necessary for effective mature learning of a mature adult to be able to learn properly. The second item that we have under this humanistic uh, and social psychologist theory is the Abraham Maslow. He discovered that education should help students to look within themselves, and from this self knowledge, develop a set of values which will guide them in their life of work. This is as opposed to the traditional teaching, which concentrated on force feeding prescribed knowledge and neglected to encourage the development of the student uh, as a person in the society. So, where we force people to be able to learn, we help people to be able to build certain set of values and to be able to have that self knowledge and continue learning as an adult. So, adult learner decides to continue the education out of interest rather than uh, an order where you have certain force that is being applied to be able to gain an extra degree or qualification. So this is something that you must be able to understand. In your own free time, I want you to be able to list 5 situations that help you learn best and that you can be able to do at your own time. So we also have something that was done by Albert Bandura. So Albert puts up something that is interesting. So an American who discovered modeling or social learning theory. So, a lot of learning behavior is learned from people who we interact with through imitation. These people are called models, and that's why we call this a model theory or model social learning theory. So, you can be able to see that people have got models. These models are imitated, and therefore they affect certain behavior. So, learning through observation is uh, very important because the learning through observation of the behavior of another person is what helps this theory by Albert Bandura to be able to take effect. So we've been able to do a lot of things. We've been able to define what teaching is. We've been able to define who this teacher is, and therefore I want to be able to wind up shortly. So a teacher talks to a teacher talks to learners and should also do the following: let learners talk to him or her, let the learners talk to each other, show learners how to perform certain tasks, allow learners to practice and survive by themselves and supervise by themselves. Uh, when we do this, we must also be able to look at the principles of teaching. And we look at principles of learning. We also look at principles of teaching. Here we are looking at active learning, encouraging learners to actively participate during teaching and learning session, clarity by speaking audibly, writing neatly, and selecting your visual aids carefully. And also we look at mastery, ensuring mastery by continuously assessing the learners as well as assessing them at the end of the course through repetition and practice. Ensure that all learners know and can do it. Individualize, teaching methods that allow individual differences of the learners to be brought up. We also had got motivation, and that we were able to discuss. So, teaching is a triad, is a three element uh, thing or something. It involves the teacher, the student, and the content. These three meet at the table of learning. So we also have got the principle of retention of learning, and we discussed it when we were discussing issues of forgetting. So learners remember best those materials that have cautiously intended for them to be able to remember. So sensory involvement increases retention. The more senses involved, the more retention is there. Emotional involvement increases retention, a smile, a joke, an example. Also, overlearning improves retention. Where one learns beyond his mastery, he ends up retaining some. But if you underlearn, then you will not have enough to retain. So that's something that you must be able to understand. So we also have periodic practices that improves retention, mimicry, as I talked about it yesterday. Basically, for example, and also having the mnemonics, basically looking at abbreviations, for example, acronyms, having like SMART for objectives, KP for short forms will help you be able to better learn. So the functions and characteristics of the teacher, we expect that there's what is called a bad teacher and a good teacher, but you'll be able to see how that goes. We'll be able to gauge me whether I'm a good teacher or a bad teacher as we'll be able to finish teaching and learning. So functioning or the functions and planning for the teacher, what does this teacher suppose, what are the functions of the teacher? He makes decisions, he makes choices, um, he prepares objectives on what is to be learned, he looks at the content that he needs to be able to discuss, he looks at the time that is allocated, he looks at the different learning activities, he identifies the resources that is needed, he informs the learner of the teaching plan that he has, he does evaluation, he does communication. For learning to take place, the teacher must communicate through explaining to and also advising the learner, provoking the learner to think, also helping the students to exchange ideas, use various teaching techniques, detect whether the learner has understood. And also, we have got also providing resources, as I mentioned. He must also be able to obtain certain resources, and I've given you resources as your teacher or instructor that you must be able to visit our library, visit our Google Drive, and also visit the portal. We also have counseling that the teacher should be able to listen to you, give you counseling, and give you support. Also, basically attempt to be able to understand you as a student, help you basically identify what options you have to be able to make decisions, advise and inform. That helps you as a learner, does his own assessment and does evaluation to be able to find out what happens, encourage self and peer assessment. As you be able to do group discussions, you'll be able to find out whether people have understood or not, and basically continuing self education, uh, being informed about the subject that you need to discuss, among other things, provide leadership and also disciplining of the students. We also have characteristics of a good teacher. He's knowledgeable, he's patient, he's a good communicator, he knows his learners, he's a good role model, he's a good listener, he motivates the learners, he's organized, he's dedicated, he's punctual, he's smart. And basically the characteristics of a bad teacher, if you want to know the bad teacher, you're rude to learners, you're boring, um, you do not allow the learners to be able to um, give you their contrary view. You're untidy, you're also poor communicator, you're not devoted, and you are not systemic, or you basically also a bad role model, you're a dictator, and also non-empathetic, not knowledgeable, you're impatient, and basically emotional, and demotivates learners. So that is something that you must be able to understand as we continue. Tomorrow we'll basically look at micro teaching. So we'll be able to look at micro teaching, we'll be able to look at micro teaching skills, and that will be all for today. I want to be able to ask us one question. Um, Let me see if I can be able to share my screen again. Just allow me for 1 minute. You tell me if you can hear me.
Google Digital Skills for Africa offers over 40 free online courses. Learn new skills such as the fundamentals of digital.
Is the audio okay?
Hi, welcome to my video blog, also known as a vlog, I think. This is
No.
something new to me, but
You
I
can't
thought this
hear
might be a
him?
really cool way to present some material on a blog. I know that YouTube
Yeah.
is a really popular place.
Okay.
I doubt I'm going to make.
Okay. So there'll be no need to be able to do that. Let me just give you the link so that you can be able to just have it. Okay. So the question that we have today, you need to just take a minute. In your opinion, based on what we've learned, do you think that your instructor is a good instructor or a bad instructor? You can just say there in the text. You will not be victimized. Don't please me. Just write your feedback. Take a minute so that we can wind up. I'm waiting for you. Yes. 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 Poa.
Sijui hii namba yako nilipata wapi?
Okay, we ni nani?
Esther, naona sijui nimeona namba yako mahali sijui kuna nini ya nutrition.
What did
Kama
you
sio hii.
what did you want me to help you with?
Niko naona sijui wanaanza kufunza renal from tarehe moja mpaka
See, you just registered, then we continue. Is there a problem with that? Fanya hivyo mama.
Nauliza
Yeah.
natuma kwa hiyo namba.
Tuma tu kwa hii number. Yes, that is how the system is. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sawa.
Hi. Hello, how are you? Beryl, proceed. We don't have a lot of time.
Hello.
Beryl, hello. Kindly continue.
Yes, I think the teacher is a good instructor. He's even able to identify the students.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes. Aber. Jogi 6:30 kokadwa dhi omogi. Gochoni. Okay. So I thank you all for availing yourself and also giving me your candid feedback. I am always phone call away for you to be able to express your problems, frustrations that you can basically have in the program. Don't stress yourself out. This is a very easy and nice program. So it should be able to help you to go through this product in a way that is stress free. This is one of the easiest adult learning program that you'll ever have uh, because it is stress free. We don't want you to be stressed. We can organize counseling for you if you want, including peer counseling. So if you have your challenges, don't chicken out. You have invested your time. You have come a long way. You have your motivations. You have your goals. We'll support you to be able to achieve those goals. Thank you very much.